Hello and welcome to the TIFF Bell Lightbox for the launch of our Goethe Films series on Christoph Schlingensief, which we titled Approach Those You Fear. I'm Jutta Brendemühl, the program curator at the Goethe-Institut, the German Cultural Center just down the street. Thank you for joining us for our latest and I think it's safe to say probably scariest Goethe Films program so far. It's actually, it turns out it's a perfect day for this particular film, 120 Days of Bottrop, which Schlingensief himself called the last new German film, so referring back to the 1970s new German cinema. As TIFF this morning announced that new German film veteran Margarete von Trotta will be on the festival's platform jury in September. So when I see her, I'll ask her what she thinks of this particular film. Iconoclast, agent provocateur, enfant terrible Schlingensief was and remains a contested, but either way influential figure in German contemporary thought and art, film, performance. He didn't stop. I thought this moment in time, 2018, where we are in the world, felt like the right one to run a series based on his own programmatic quote. To be successful and to feel that I do good work, I have to approach those I fear. About an artist who was as intellectual as he was crazy, we'll get a lot of that over the next 10 days, as caring as he was unorthodox, but for me, most importantly, at the core, he was fiercely humanist and extremely generous and patient in reaching out to people who did not share his views and probably not our views as we're sitting here. And that, of course, is sort of a rare feat these days. Hope to see you back here on Tuesday for the award-winning documentary about Schlingensief's most controversial political action, Foreigners Out, and you can guess where he takes this, sarcastically, of course. This little series, graciously co-presented by our friends at the Laserblast Film Society and Kino Vortex, thanks guys, will close in a week from now with two offers that we paired as a double bill. Schlingensief's, as I like to call it, reunification massacre, the German chainsaw massacre, which of course is a riff on the famous Texas chainsaw massacre. Followed by an entertaining on-screen interview where Schlingensief talks to philosopher Alexander Kluge, himself an icon and filmmaker, about his radical choices and his artistic philosophy. If you need more Schlingensief, before or after that, I put several background articles as well as a free documentary, another free documentary about Schlingensief, and a few interviews up on our film blog. Best of all, I don't have to go on about what you're going to see tonight in particular, because Bruce LaBruce stepped up to that challenge. And when I cautiously checked in with him this week after having sent him the screeners, he emailed back, "Me, deterred, never." And that's, of course, your answer why I chose Bruce LaBruce to introduce a program called Approach Those You Fear. Bruce is, of course, one of our best-known actor-filmmakers in Canada, although I do see him more in Berlin than I do here, ironically, and he's considered one of the founders of the queercore movement. You might have caught the doc Queercore at Hot Docs last week. His beautiful film Gerontophilia played at the Venice Film Festival 5 years ago. Pierrot Lunaire screened at the Berlinale Forum in 2014, and we just had the head of the Berlinale Forum, Christoph de Hechte, in town. And then it won the Teddy Award, and Bruce won the coveted Teddy Award. Bruce was also president of Cannes' Queer Palm jury that same year, and he is in pre-production for his latest Sans Narcisse, which I expect to see at the Berlinale 2020. Right, Bruce?
Maybe.
Yes. Producing next year, he tells me. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, Bruce LaBruce on Christoph Schlingensief's last new German film. Thanks and enjoy the ride. And thank you.
Okay, so I'm sure some of you are probably hoping I would arrive here with a chainsaw covered in blood, wearing a Doug Ford mask, and running around threatening to cut everyone's genitals off, and I should have done that, but maybe not getting paid quite enough to do that. But Also, I would probably have been arrested for terrorism, and then I would have gotten a really huge cleaning bill from the Bell Lightbox. So, what you're going to get instead is just some very incoherent notes about Schlingensief. Um, I am so deeply embarrassed to say that I'd never seen these films before, and of course, I was aware of Christoph Schlingensief, and I've worked a lot in Berlin in theater and made a lot of films in Berlin. I think at least five now or six, and I've done four theater productions at the Hebel am Ufer, which is a very kind of legendary theater, the How Theater in Berlin. Working, especially when Matthias Lilienthal was the artistic director, who was a close colleague of Schlingensief. So I would often be doing work, and people would point at me and go, Schlingensief. They'd be like, that sounds like something Schlingensief. It reminds me of Schlingensief, or So I kind of had an idea of what his work might have been about when they told me what aspects of what I was doing or my work reminded them of something Schlingensief might do, but I never actually watched the films. So I finally watched the films this week, and I'm just like, I'm just like blown away and kind of like shell shocked, and I would actually wake up in the middle of the night and go Schlingensief. So like I said, these are just kind of like some incoherent notes that I've made about his work, and they're really in no order, and I'm not really giving any biographical background or anything like that, except that I will say, Schlingensief was a total Wunderkind, which I love. He started out making like Super 8 films in his basement when he was 8 years old, and he would invite the neighbors over, and very kind of precocious and kind of genius from the get go. So I find that very endearing, and he's like Germany's little Orson Welles with chainsaws and kind of like crazy political beliefs. So one thing that Jutta mentioned was how he really addressed the issue of the rise of the right and the extreme right, and the new kind of tide of extreme conservatism that seems to be overtaking the world currently. Uh, but the way he did it was very important, and it takes you have to be very nimble and very kind of uh, uh, I don't know, smart and unorthodox in the way that you confront this new scourge, because and the rise of like neo-fascism, because they've become very smart, and they're very nimble themselves, and they use political incorrectness, for example, in a way that used to be something that was only used on the left, and so what's very instructive about his work is how he, as you just said, he actually really confronted his fear, or confronted the enemy, and engaged them even in his work. I mean, the way that the current left seems to be addressing the resurgence of the extreme right, or what's going on in the U.S. It's kind of humorless, and there's a certain self-righteous indignation, which is never a good idea. And there's like political correctness. There's this phenomenon of the echo chamber, where the people are just listening to themselves and their own point of view, and not really engaging what's going on the other side. There's entrenched ideologies and doctrinaire politics, and even ideas of censorship, like censoring certain people on the right from not talking and not actually listening to them, and goes against freedom of speech. And there's this idea of policing language and desire. So Schlingensief made an infamous performance called Schlingensief's Container, where he erected some containers in front of the opera in Vienna, and he did kind of his version of Big Brother. So he had actual refugees inside these containers with cameras everywhere, and the uh, with a huge sign above it that said Ausländer raus, foreigners out. And it was like Big Brother, except that they would every day they would expel from the country 2 refugees, and people could, the public could actually go buy these containers, and and look at or even feed the refugees, and then you could go online and vote which refugee you wanted to expel from the country. So obviously this is a very contentious and kind of like extreme kind of statement, and it caused a national furor in Austria. But I mean, it's sort of so exemplary of what he does, like the fact that he used actual refugees and he obviously engages them in such a sincere and direct way, and has them as collaborators in the whole thing. And they're obviously into it and enjoying it, and enjoying the theater of it. I mean, they're actually wearing wigs and kind of concealing their identity because they're real refugees and they could have been actually expelled. And so there's just a real playfulness about it, but a real respect for the people that are engaged in the performance. And like all of his work, it just like riled up so much latent, actually, prejudice and kind of xenophobia in a lot of Austrians that maybe had never been apparent before. It also enraged people because they didn't, they were against this kind of the rise of the real right, but of the neoconservatism and this kind of paranoia about immigrants, but they just totally were disagreed with the way that he was presenting it. As Jutta and I were talking about, one person pointed in and goes, "You're an artist," as if this was like, the ultimate insult that you could give to someone, because he was actually using his art in such a directly political and kind of like contentious way. About I've mentioned a bit about my own private Schlingensief, my connection to him. I did theater at the How with people that he worked with. There's a new Jutta and I were talking about who might be the new Schlingensief, in Germany, and there's a theater director named Vegard Vinge, who's actually Norwegian, and he does these crazy kind of adaptations of Ibsen plays, and at the Volksbühne, which is the legendary theater in Berlin, and he staged a 12-hour version of Ibsen's John Gabriel Borkman, in which he was almost arrested because he was like peeing in his own mouth on stage, and he was throwing feces at the audience, and then when they threatened to arrest him, I think he shat on the arrest warrant or something, so he's crazy. And but the theater is stunning. I saw part of the play. Unfortunately, I couldn't stay for the whole 12 hours, but and I've hung out with him, and he really and Susanna Saxa, the actress I work with quite often, is in works regularly with Vegard Vinge. So am I pronouncing it right? Vinge? I don't know. Anyway, he's definitely in the spirit of Schlingensief, as you will see by watching the movie. I've also hung out with some of the people that are in the film, like Udo Kier, and it's interesting because there's a scene in 100 Days of Bottrop where it's actually shot right outside Udo Kier's house in Silver Lake, which I've been had the pleasure to have visited, and so I really related to the film personally on a number of levels. What I love about Schlingensief is that he actually made a remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is like so awesome. He understands that using B movie horror tropes and it's something that that really digs into a kind of anxiety, a kind of things that are kind of repressed in society, and they come out in a monstrous form in kind of B movies, sexual repression, political oppression, things like that. So he uses horror, gore, sci-fi kind of imagery, and mixed with kind of agitprop cinema. A lot of his films have slogans and kind of direct political action kind of techniques, propaganda film kind of tropes. And if you get a chance to see the German reunification Chainsaw Massacre, or the German Chainsaw Massacre, you really should. It's playing, right? Yeah, I would highly recommend it. It's an amazing kind of B movie response to a very kind of difficult chapter in German history, and it's done in the most endearing way. I mean, his films are completely over the top. They're gory. They're like there's a lot of sexual imagery and explicit sexual imagery, but it's done in a very B movie style, which kind of gives it a kind of almost like a charming quality. For example, when when you see German Chainsaw Massacre, when he's running when the guy's running around with the chainsaw, it's not even running. It's like it's just really fake, all the blood and the gore and everything. It's cheap, but it looks great. It's aesthetically beautiful, which is something that is another earmark of Schlingensief. But he really understood that B movie tropes are designed to tap into the fears of the common people, and social anxiety and fears of political upheaval are all expressed in B movies, especially B movie horror movies, like they were in America in the 70s with filmmakers like Tobe Hooper and Wes Craven. So that's one thing I love about Schlingensief. Another thing is the way that he bites the hand that feeds him and really attacks and has a complete skepticism for funding agencies and institutions, award shows, anything that smacks of the establishment, and especially the cinema or theater establishment, he viciously attacks, which probably explains why he partly had terrible trouble getting or problems getting his own work financed, which is another thing I can relate very strongly to with Schlingensief. So this is like this is why I've been waking up in the middle of the night saying Schlingensief, because it's just like this this meta world of references and kind of like films within film and film references and kind of it's just been giving me nightmares. Anyway, obviously Schlingensief was carrying on a long tradition of iconoclasm and contrarianism. His evisceration of cinema and cinematic conventions and his disemboweling of the stuffy traditions of theater and art are more necessary than ever today. Christoph Schlingensief died of lung cancer on August 21st, 2010 at the age of 49. He is sorely missed. Thank you. Hope those wasn't too many spoilers. Thanks. Danke.